This time on Weekend Spin, Ace Frehley is going to release his first solo album right alongside his fellow Kiss bandmates. And he's going to kick their asses. Hello, this is TJR, and if this is your first time here, welcome to the channel. If not, welcome back. Ace Frehley's debut solo album was released on September 18th, 1978 by Casablanca Records. It was one of 4 solo albums released by each member of the band Kiss as separate solo albums, but yet still under the Kiss label. Up to this point, guitarist Paul Stanley and bassist Gene Simmons handled most of Kiss's songwriting and lead vocal duties, with lead guitarist Ace Frehley averaging roughly 1 to 2 songs per album, as far as songwriting was concerned, and not recording any lead vocals until 1977's Love Gun album. Ace Frehley has been quoted as stating that prior to working on his solo album, he was approached by Gene and Paul, who both offered their assistance to him. In his 2011 memoir, No Regrets, he wrote that their offer to help felt condescending to him, and while he didn't feel they were being deliberately malicious, he did feel very motivated to prove that he didn't need their help. In the present day, most music critics and fans will agree that of the 4 solo albums released in 1978, Ace's was the best. I personally felt that way in 1978, when it first came out, and I still feel that way now. But I also see now that Ace Frehley had 2 secret weapons when he went into the studio to record his album. The first was producer-engineer Eddie Kramer, who co-produced the album with him. Eddie Kramer already had an impressive list of credits to his name as either a recording engineer, producer, or both, and his resume included legends like Peter Frampton, David Bowie, Led Zeppelin, the Rolling Stones, Jimi Hendrix, and the Beatles. He had also already had a notable amount of history with Kiss. This included the albums Rock and Roll Over, Love Gun, Alive 1, and 2. But he also produced the band's original demos. If you've never heard these, give them a listen next time that you can. They are available on YouTube. Once you hear them, I'm sure that you will agree that it's really too bad the band couldn't retain him to produce their first album, because the demos with Eddie Kramer are so much more exciting to listen to than what was released on their debut. So right out the gate, Ace started with a top-flight producer and collaborator who not only understood Kiss, but also understood Ace as well. Now, the album's next secret weapon was drummer Anton Fig, but more on him in a moment. First, let's talk about the songs. Track 1, Rip It Out.
Rip it out, take my heart, you wanted it.
The album opens with a banger, as any good rock album should. Rip It Out is an angry breakup song that features a very simple but terribly effective guitar riff. In this riff, he utilizes a technique that was very much used by Pete Townshend, which is where you run the bass note of the chord, in which case this is an E major, underneath the chords. So it feels like you've got bass guitar even if you're playing solo. By the way, Pete Townshend didn't originate that technique. I think the earliest example that I can think of is Bye Bye Love. Correction, it's Wake Up Little Susie. Right group, wrong song. Back to the program. Maybe there's an even earlier example. If you know of one, please enlighten us. During this section, the guitar and drums are gliding in sync with each other, and it sounds really great, but it does run the risk of growing tiresome if it continues for too long. Luckily it doesn't, because during the chorus, Ace wisely chooses to syncopate his guitar riffs against Anton Fig's continued straightforward drum beat. Even that last part there is very Townsend-like. I get the feeling that The Who was a big influence. At the end of the second chorus, the unexpected happens. And instead of launching into a guitar solo after the second verse like you might expect it to, we instead get a drum solo. Ace employs a very simple chromatic power chord walk, while Anton Fig simply lets loose in between. So now it's time to talk about Anton Fig as this album's secret weapon. Now, I don't want to take anything away from Ace when I talk about this. I'm a big fan. He was a huge influence on my guitar playing. And Ace definitely came into the studio with his A game on. He walked in with some very solid songs, some very killer and sometimes even crazy guitar riffs, and some very mean, crunchy guitar tones. But it is Anton's drums that put the force behind them. His drums propel everything to another level, and I really do feel that the album would not have sounded the same without him. No doubt Ace felt this way too, because he recruited him for his band Frehley's Comet after he left Kiss. This brings us to the guitar solo, and just like with the drum solo, Ace utilizes a call-out and response motif. Listen carefully and notice how he plays an opening theme, then plays a response to it. He will then repeat that same opening theme 4 more times, but he will follow each one of these with a completely different response. Listen a little bit more carefully, and you might notice that he repeats this same call-out and response style of lead guitar playing during the song's closing also. This second go-around is just as good as the first go-around, but you might miss it because it does get overshadowed by vocals on the closing repeat chorus. Which is okay, because when I listen to it, it's clear to me Ace intended it to just give that last go-round of the chorus a little extra oomph. It is true that this album opens with a banger, but it's also true that every song on this album is a banger too. Track 2, Speedin' Back to My Baby.
Speeding back to my baby, and I don't mean baby.
Now, one day, myself and my partner got into it over this song. We were in the car, and this song happened to come up on Random Shuffle. She made a very snarky comment to me about the song's lyrics. Speedin' back to my baby, and I don't mean maybe. I think she said something like, wow, that's really deep. That must have taken him a long time to write. And in response, I quoted from the Gene Vincent song, Bebopalula, she's my baby. Bebopalula, I don't mean maybe. A song that I knew that she liked. And I asked her, how is this song by Ace Frehley any different from this other song by Gene Vincent? Lyrically speaking, that is. And then I made my point to her that I will now make to you. Speeding Back to My Baby is the heavy rock equivalent of Chuck Berry. Now hear me out. Like so many Chuck Berry songs, it opens with a cool guitar lick that will repeat before each verse. Just like so many Chuck Berry songs, its lyrics tell a little story, and there is even a car involved.
I'm driving down the road to 95 miles per hour. Oh yeah.
Also, the use of vocalist Susan Collins during the song's closing adds a nice little flirtation with soul music. One more thing I will add about track 3 before we move on is that it lyrically feels like a continuation of the previous song, Rip It Out. Rip It Out is the song's main character catching his girl with another man and being torn up over it. In Speeding Back to My Baby, he has now taken off for the open road. Revving his car engine allows his head engine to slow down a bit to the point that he begins to cool off and begins to wonder if he shouldn't give her a chance to explain herself. I noticed this lyrical thread between these two tracks on my very first listen, and I wondered, in fact, if the story might continue with track 3. It was all just a coincidence, of course, but this brings us to track 3, Snowblind. Snowblind opens with just a really killer guitar riff that, to me at least, predates 90s grunge. The lyrics are about, well, they're about driving in your car and being blinded by the snow. Yeah, right. Ace wrote what he knew about, and his drug and alcohol addiction issues were certainly prevalent at this point in his life. And I'll add that this won't be the only track on this album that will draw inspiration from altered states of consciousness. So, to sum up, we have a very cool guitar riff that predates 90s grunge. We have Anton Fig's spot-on drums and a killer transition to double time when the solo hits. Not to mention an electrifying solo from Ace. Track 4, Ozone. I'm seeing a pattern here. Remember how I talked about track 2 being a continuation of track 1? Well, track 4, Ozone, kind of feels like a continuation of track 3. Again, Ace is writing what he knows about. Track 3 is about getting high, and track 4 is about enjoying the ride once you're there. Ozone's intro and main guitar riff for the verse feels very Zeppelin-like. But the riff on the chorus is insane and out of this world. It's riffs like these that really earn him the title of the Spaceman. And the use of acoustic guitar underneath the electric is used to great effect on this track also. But I have to admit, it is that one really insane, crazy guitar riff that is absolutely brain-melting. And I think it's one of his best riffs ever. I also love how it interacts with Anton Fig's drums, which are both meditative and heavy at the same time. The guitar solo is almost, and I stress the word almost, nothing more than a blues box scale played back and forth. Now, I have heard some critics really come down on this part of the song because they feel it is too simple. I'll agree that it is very simple, but it works perfectly for this song. Track 5, What's on Your Mind? Like the track preceding it, What's on Your Mind also makes really nice use of mixing acoustic 12-string with heavy overdriven electric guitar tones. It may not be as pedal to the metal as everything that has preceded it, but I do see it as a sincere attempt at a love song, except this is not a love ballad. This is what I call a love rocker. There is a very nice little instrumental breakdown after the second chorus, where Ace doesn't so much play a guitar solo as create a very nice melodic interplay between the lead and rhythm guitars. This is one of the things I like about Ace. Sometimes a nice melody says more than the fastest licks on the planet. And I think Ace gets this. There is a strong, heavy, upbeat vibe to the chorus, and it provides a nice, optimistic ending to side 1. This brings us to side 2 and track 6, New York Groove.
I'm back in the New York groove.
Now, this is one that will definitely go down in my list of remakes that improve on the original. Of course, back when this track was charting on radio, I had no clue that it was a remake. Since then, I have listened to the original, written by Russ Ballard and recorded by the British glam rock band Hello. It is interesting to hear the two and compare them. They are both so much the same and yet so much different from each other as well. Now, don't take this part the wrong way, because I do like the Hello version, but Ace Frehley and Eddie Kramer managed to take this already fun track and not only make it more fun, but also heavier, more expansive, more theatrical, and also more pop-friendly all at the same time. Even more unexpected is that they also crafted a crossover track that could be played at the disco dance clubs of the day as well. Growing up as a kid in Southern California, I was never going to make it to Studio 54 in New York, but this feels like it could have fit in. Track 7, In Need of Love.
I'm in need of love.
Now, I have heard this track referred to as a throwaway by some critics, and I get the feeling that a lot of this criticism is based on how simple the song's construction is. While it's true that the power chords and the slide notes used by Ace during the verse and chorus are nothing spectacularly brilliant, it's how the saturated delay effects are put to use on both the guitar and vocals that give this song a power and a vibe that I would describe as psychedelic metal. I want to also add that Anton Fig's very John Bonham-like drums play a nice counterpart to the effects-heavy instrumentation. There is a real synergy between both Ace and Anton on the whole album, but especially on this track. And just when you think you've got this song pinned down, it jumps into a crazy double time bridge that is the counter opposite of what preceded it. Speaking of crazy, this brings us to track 8, Wiped Out.
I was wiped out. I had my lights out.
With its funky guitar rhythms and semi-spoken lyrics, I can't help but feel that Ace was heavily inspired by Walk This Way by Aerosmith, released 3 years earlier. But also used for inspiration is the song Wipeout by the Safaris, as Anton's opening drum riff and Ace's hyena laugh pay homage to the 1963 classic. It's an absolutely balls-to-the-wall rocker, but then once you think you've got where this song is going pegged, in comes this absolutely bizarre time signature change during the chorus. This is where the song completely becomes Ace Frehley and no one else. I remember back in the day reading a Guitar Player magazine interview with Ace where he was asked, what about that strange time signature change on Wiped Out? He just responded, you'd have to ask Anton Fig about that one. Just like with Ozone, it's riffs like these that really earn him the title of Spaceman. Because you hear these and you think to yourself, how does he come up with this stuff? This brings us to the last track, and what I think is really the best track on the entire album. Track 9, Fractured Mirror. Fractured Mirror begins with the sound of birds in the distance, accompanied by a repeating bell tone. These two sounds, for me at least, implied that I was somewhere out to sea or maybe at the seashore, even though there is no audible sound of ocean on the recording. Then this delicate guitar arpeggio melody between two chords fades in This part goes on for several minutes, along with what sounds like a 12-string acoustic guitar, just before the drums and bass kick in. Now, I should point out that this is the only track on the album to not feature Anton Fig, and instead features drummer Carl Tallarico. On this track, he plays a very tight, repeating drum pattern that today feels like it might have been created using programmable drums. And this is no slight on Carl Tallarico. It takes a lot of stamina to play a repeating pattern like this over and over again with what sounds like almost no variations. It's a great drum pattern, and its repeat drum loop-like feel in some ways reminds me of Ringo's drum pattern on Tomorrow Never Knows. Next is the arrival of some very huge B major power chords. This will later transition to a little walk from G major to A major to F sharp major, and then G major, A major to E major. All these patterns will repeat themselves moving forward, but what keeps this song interesting is the multitudes of tiny little musical textures, including a very freaky guitar line that I believe Ace is playing on a guitar synthesizer. All these various musical moving parts build up to a climax before each separate part starts to fade out, leaving us back where we started with just the opening delicate guitar arpeggio melody, which then fades out too. In a 1979 Guitar Player magazine interview, Ace was quoted as saying, "I used an old Gibson electric double neck for that, a very rare one with a 6-string guitar neck and a mandolin neck. I don't think they make those anymore. On the intro, I tuned the mandolin neck to an open E and let it drone and resonate while I was picking the figure on the other neck. I don't think I've ever heard it on record before, that sound. We really got excited about that when I came up with it. It was also going through a Marshall stack that we were miking, so that's how we got a lot of the ambience. On a pure listening level, this instrumental was both ethereal, new age, and very hard rock at the same time. It does, to me at least, make me feel like I'm moving through time and space. But because of its musical construction, and considering that it was recorded in a time before the age of access to digital stems, this track provided me with an invaluable lesson on how to layer multiple guitar tracks over each other. Fractured Mirror would also begin a trend for Ace of closing subsequent solo albums with an instrumental track. This has included Fractured 2, Fractured 3, Fractured Quantum, and Quantum Flux. Fractured Mirror is a very un-Kiss-like song, but it is 100% Ace, and I love it. I currently own 2 versions of this album. Here is the more recent remastered CD version, and I also have this modern pressing vinyl version taken from the solo album's box set. 45 years later, and this album still gives me a jolt of rock and roll electricity. 45 years later, and this album can still make me feel like I'm 16 again. Ace was a big influence on me as a guitarist too. But even before I started to learn how to play, I knew that I loved his aggressive but also sometimes quirky sense of phrasing. I loved his vibrato technique, but mostly I loved the sometimes weird riffs he would create. And even though I didn't necessarily understand all those terms back then, I definitely understood how it made me feel. This is TJR, and those are my thoughts. I'll be curious to hear what you have to say in the comments. Please help me with these videos by clicking like and clicking subscribe, and also by sharing them with anyone you think might be interested. You can also show your support by leaving a one-time super thanks, or by becoming a patron supporter. Patron supporters do receive exclusive weekly videos not available on this channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode of Weekend Spin.